Hi, CEOs. It's Kathryn Brooks here, the CEO of She's Wearing CEO. And I'm so glad you're here this week. We have another edition of CEO Live. And I'm going to add our guest right now. Here she is. Our guest this week. And she's joining us right now. She was the editor-in-chief of Women's Day magazine for quite a tenure. There she is. Hi, Susan.
Hey, Kathryn. How are you?
Doing well. I'm so glad to have you. I was just doing a brief intro, but so glad that you're here today. Susan Spencer, as I was saying, was the editor-in-chief of Women's Day magazine. She brought and transformed this magazine from the excellence that it once held into today's time, and it became the best-selling magazine on U.S. newsstands. And she just has a lot of credits behind her name in strategic communications, working with Pfizer, American Express. She's also an author. So I just think in this series, this is just another dynamic female leader that we all need to get to know a little bit better. So Susan, thanks for being here today again.
Thank you so much, Kathryn. This is fantastic. I really appreciate the time, and it actually got me out of my pajamas essentially.
Oh gosh,
into lipstick.
We're all there. Every day is a new day, right? But
exactly.
Kind of feels like the prior day. So for the next 30, 45 minutes or so, I'd like to talk to Susan about her bio, her career, kind of the obvious resume items that we talk through with each of our leaders that we talk to on CEO Live each week. But I also want to go a little bit behind her scenes, talk about how her world has changed today in this telecommuting, remote working world we're in, and then also kind of learn about what helped her along the way. What were the really true success factors that enabled her success and enabled her to achieve such a high position in the media industry? And any kind of leadership, managerial perspectives, I'd love to get those along the way too. So, but let's dive right in. If you would just give everyone just an overview of how you are where you are today.
So I think that the best place to start in talking about my career is really what I was most passionate about throughout my life and still am, which really is words. And if you ask me to define myself, the first word I'll say is editor. Second word I'll say is writer, but I've always loved the process of editing more than writing. So I've been fortunate enough, basically since I graduated from college, to work in the media industry as an editor and a writer. I've sustained a 32-year career as doing both these things that I've been passionate about for a long time, and I feel really, really lucky to have done that. I was also able throughout my career to really sort of follow my own interests. So when I was right out of college and I had the travel itch, I did a lot of traveling and ended up working for a travel magazine, doing a lot of writing. When I was a young mother, I worked for a parenting magazine. And when I reached a kind of a crossroads in my career, and I realized that if I wanted to go further, I would need to learn more about sales and marketing and the business side of publishing. I went to work for a company where I was able to do that. So I think that I've always sort of, throughout my career, kind of followed, where I am at that point in my life. And it's really sort of helped me to build on and to get to a place where I, was to create my own success to a certain extent. And, it all culminated in 2012 when I got a position as Women's Day, as editor-in-chief of Women's Day. We took a brand that was, as you said, it was excellent, but it was a little bit sad, a little bit tired, and it really needed some TLC. And my team and I really brought it back to life. We gave it new purpose, we re-engaged the audience, and we did bring it to the point where it was and still is the top-selling monthly on U.S. newsstands. So a huge achievement for my team and me, and we were really proud of it. I left that job on February 28th. And we can talk about that whole transition. I'm still trying to figure out if it was the worst timing in the world or the best timing in the world. Can't quite decide. But I left, for really good reasons. I was ready for a change and ready to move on. And, was at a point in my life and my career where I felt like I wanted to try something different. So that's kind of me in a nutshell.
Wow. Talk a little bit about so you were always a writer as number one priority.
Well, editing and then writing.
Editing and writing. Thank you. Did as you went from kind of being a travel, creative type mindset person, talk about the transition from that into working more with corporations or kind of fitting into that, corporate mold, corporate media.
Well, I think of my travel writing days and my early days of working at magazines as really being a time when I was really building and honing my skills. And it was always within most magazines are owned by corporations, and I did, for the most part, work for large corporations, for Hearst, for Gruner and Jahr back in the day. But I think that at a certain point in my career, as I said before, I started to realize that I really needed a whole new set of skills, and I really needed to better understand, how magazines were being sold and how projects were being sold in. So what I did is I went to work for Time Inc. And at that point it was called custom publishing. Now it's called branded content, essentially. And that's when I really started to come into contact with companies like Pfizer and American Express. I also worked for a lot of nonprofits, the Humane Society of the United States, the American Bible Society, one of my favorite clients. And I think that I saw in those interactions sort of, how to implement a marketing plan and how to sell in an idea and how to sort of use content and to use really mostly, at that point it was mostly print magazines, but evolved into websites and digital content, how you can use that to sort of push a company's brand or speak to its audience. And so it was a real education, but at the end of the day, I was still editing and writing and I was picking up management skills as I went along. And so I was learning to manage as well, and learned, about managing to a budget because we were given budgets, by these companies. So, and I learned how to, do presentations. So I think that I was a little bit more, it was more of a corporate job, but I wasn't straying too far from, what made my heart beat, which was the writing.
Right. That's great. What I'm hearing from you is taking opportunities that are in front of you and building upon them, using skills that you've developed either on your own through various positions, and then, continuing to build upon your toolbox.
Right.
So that's what I'm hearing.
Right, exactly. Which is not to say that you're not taking risks and you're not going into new situations in a new job where you're doing something different. I mean, I will never forget going into my first kind of sales call at that job at Time Inc. We went out to California and we were meeting with Mercury, who was a division of Ford at the time. We were pitching a car magazine, essentially. And I sat in that meeting and I was sitting next to a sales guy and the marketing person was across from me. And just sort of watching the fluidity with which they dealt with a client, I think I learned more in that 10 minutes than I had learned my previous 10 years. I mean, it was a real sort of an immersion. I, of course, was completely tongue-tied and could barely speak because I didn't know what I was doing. But, I learned, and that's really how you do it, is putting yourself into situations where you're not 100% ready or sure, but you just kind of push forward and do it.
Right. I totally understand the corporate side of the coin. I was at Coca-Cola for many years, and being in those meetings where, I was largely the P&L finance person. I transitioned into marketing, but, working on those cross-functional teams and, dealing a lot with media, both in-house and, external agencies. So, that's a big, a lot of learning there to be had.
Yeah, exactly. And I think about that particular job, that time, and as sort of, it was such a huge learning time for me and a huge launching pad that when I got to my job as editor-in-chief, that's where all that experience kind of came to roost. And because as an editor-in-chief, you're sitting in rooms with the marketing people and the sales people, and you're pitching ideas to clients, and you're seeking out advertisers, and all of those things that I was doing earlier in my career kind of all came to fruition in this one job. And I don't think that I would have been as effective or as good at my job as editor-in-chief if I hadn't had that experience.
Right. Moving into your leadership perspectives, did you find as you became or moving into roles that led to becoming editor-in-chief, did you find that managing people that are, let's say, purely creative versus people that are more analytical, more P&L focused. Did you use a different style with each of those people?
It's a really good question. I don't think that I did, because I think that I think that if I have to describe my leadership style, I lead with empathy. And I think that empathy goes across the board, whether you're, an accountant or an art director. I think that leading a creative team, does take a certain amount of finessing, because especially in magazines, creative people they're just big personalities, and I always, my joke, like my mantra over, 32 years in magazines was, magazine making is a team sport. We're all in this together, and we're thrown into rooms together, or actually now not so much, but normally thrown into rooms together. And there's a lot of ideas being bounced around, and there's a lot of egos on the line, and there's a lot of push and pull between the words and the pictures. And that's sort of the, that kind of energy and that kind of, push-pull is really what makes magazine making so exciting. Mm-hmm. But it's also a lot of different kinds of people that you have to manage. And I felt like I sort of tried to manage with empathy and with fairness, by listening to people, and most of all, by building a team of people who really loved the brand and really wanted to do their best work for it.
Yes.
And I think that was part of our success.
Did you find that you had to set the tone for loving the brand, or did you feel like your teams were largely made up of people that had that inherent love of the brand? Can you teach loving a brand is what I'm getting at?
Yeah, I think you can. I think you can. I mean, I think that I always thought of myself as the cheerleader in chief. I mean, both not just to my team, but to internally within the company, Hearst, and also externally. I mean, I did a lot of PR and a lot of marketing, essentially, of the brand. And I think that if you don't love your brand, and you can't communicate that, and you can't be a living embodiment of that brand, then forget it. You're just in the wrong job. So I feel like I was able to kind of create a group of people around me, in hiring over the years that I was there, people who both really, really appreciated the brand, but more importantly, really appreciated the audience. Mm-hmm. Because it's one thing to love a brand, but it's another thing to really understand who that brand is aimed at. And I think we were extremely successful at that.
Right. So for those that are just joining us, our audience here, this is the Tuesday edition of CEO Live, and I'm talking to Susan Spencer, who was the editor-in-chief of Women's Day, media executive, author, charitable leader. We're going to get into more of her career here in a second, but I just want to bring everybody up to date. Also, I'll just add that there is a written portion to this interview. So everything we're talking about here live is probably covered in the written piece that is located on she'sherown.ceo.com. We'll probably go a little deeper on a few topics, but just want to bring everybody up to date. Talk about, you mentioned empathy, which is amazing. And I think anyone that is looking for his or her ideal manager wants to hear that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when you were kind of you've been on both sides of the equation where you're the pitcher and you're the pitchee. You've been receiving and giving pitches. Did that experience or those experiences kind of help you, in today's world where you're sitting behind the desk and someone's pitching you? Do you kind of feel where they're coming from, or feel like they need to coach or guide?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that when people are pitching or were pitching to me, and I hope in the future when people are pitching to me, yes, is I think that the most important thing, I mean, empathy is important. And yes, I definitely sort of am sort of trying to be in tune with sort of where they're at. Mm-hmm. I think that the ideas that resonated most with me and the partnerships that really sort of kind of came to life the best did come from a place of empathy, but they also came from a place of authenticity. Yeah. I mean, I'm pretty notorious for having a pretty high BS meter, and I don't know. I just am able to really kind of cut through a lot of baloney sometimes, and I feel like when people came to me with pitching an idea that was really something that they were proud of and they really wanted to do, and they had some passion behind it, and they had thought it through, and it was exciting, and it was a really good idea. You know, I was in like Flynn, but if I felt like there was a little whiff of, I don't know, this wasn't quite what they wanted to be doing, then yeah, it never worked. And I think that's true in any sort of situation, whether you're interviewing or whether you're pitching a story or whether you're pitching a partnership. I mean, I think you have to approach it with authenticity and passion.
Did you watch Mad Men every week? I have to ask.
You know something, I never actually got into that show, but yeah. I've had several people tell me that I should.
I did toward the end. I know. Yeah. It took me a while to get into it.
Yeah.
Especially the Coca-Cola aspect at the end. The big, it's not a spoiler alert anymore. It's out there, but that was the big, you know, wow.
Yeah.
How do you serve? So you have two daughters,
yes,
right?
Yeah.
So without knowing, you know, what their interests are, where you think they're going to head career-wise, how do you best set examples for them?
I think that is the $1 million question. I like to think that I have done a pretty good job of that, although at times I think I probably haven't. I don't think anybody's perfect. I mean, I think that, you know, my daughters are on the older side. My older daughter is about to be 23. My younger daughter is 16. She's my tech assistant. She helped me out with this whole setup.
Very good. It looks beautiful. It looks awesome, by the way.
Thank you. She picked the background. She
looks great.
She's great at it. I think that I tried throughout my career to be, you know, as balanced as I could. I think there were times when work took over, and there were times when family took over. And I think that I tried to sort of move through my career trying to be respectful of both family and sort of, you know, forward movement. I talked a little bit in the written part about how shortly after my older daughter was born, I went to my boss. I was working at Child Magazine at the time, so it was a parenting magazine, and I asked if I could work at home a day a week, and she shockingly said yes, probably because it was a parenting magazine. And I was able to work at home on Fridays for probably about the following 7 or 8 years. So leaving that job, moving into another job, you know, kind of coming in and out of this, but I was really able to do that. And I think that really actually helped push my career forward, because I was able to sustain my career. And as my jobs got bigger and more responsible, I still had that safety hatch of having that day. I was also incredibly productive on those days. So to go back to your question, I think that I hope that my daughters saw that I sort of was able to take a little bit of a step back, but it didn't slow me down necessarily. And I think that that was really kind of critical and key to my career. And I hope that that's something that they will take away, that it is possible to have flexibility, and it is possible to do that. Although now with this generation, who knows, and with this whole, you know, coronavirus crisis, I mean, flexibility is almost like everybody's flexible right now, kind of.
Right.
You know?
And that leads kind of into my next question, talking about, you know, seeing that transition from, you know, moving from a completely print world into, you know, a hybrid print and digital world, versus people that are kind of just now entering the industry and they're just completely digital native. You know, I have an opinion on this, but I'd like to get yours. Do you think, you know, you're kind of better served having seen both sides and seeing that progression versus, you know, where we are today in kind of this environment? Well,
I mean, I am. One of the things I always loved doing was talking to mostly young women who wanted to, you know, come into the magazine business, and did that quite a lot. And I would say in the last couple of years, every once in a while, I would get a young woman who would show up in my office and say, "I love magazines. I want to be in magazines." And I'll look at them and I'll say, "Do you want to work for a magazine brand, or do you want to work for a magazine, like the physical thing?" Because that's really hard right now. It's really hard to just work in print. And what I would say to them is, you need to be able to work across platforms. You need to know social media. You need to know content management systems. You need to know digital publishing. And yes, if you can get some experience as a print editor too, and actually, sort of putting together books or bookazines or magazines, that's going to help you in your career as well. So in a way, it's this kind of golden era in some ways of for editors and writers who want to be content creators, because there's so many different ways that you can do it. And that I find that really exciting. I think that the opportunities for young women and young men who are coming into content, there's so many different ways that you can do it now. Video, social media, all of these things.
Mm-hmm.
I think that my advice to anyone who came in through my office was, just try to do everything. Try to learn a little bit of all of this. Be a generalist, and as your career goes along, you'll start to winnow down, where you want to head with this. But in the beginning, it just take advantage of all of these different platforms and all of these different forms of media, and really sort of build your skills.
What do you think about the move to the gig economy, or the freelance focus versus kind of that full, FTE, full-time employee corporate mindset? What do you think about that?
Well, I think that the coronavirus pandemic has really shown us how scarily weak the gig economy is. I mean, I think most people, and I've been doing in a lot of groups in the last couple of weeks, talking to people and hearing their stories. Right. I think, across the board, freelancers and people who, are in that world are really, really struggling. I was happy to see that the government, as part of the aid packages, included freelancers in this.
Yes.
I mean, I think it's always been precarious, but I understand why people have ended up doing that, and I think that a lot of people don't want full-time jobs. A lot of people want flexibility, and they want and they're willing to have the trade-off of not having insurance or not having a steady paycheck coming in. I think it has a lot to do with mindset. I think it's generational, but I think that the weakness and the flaws in the gig economy have really come out in the last couple of weeks, and I really feel for people who are struggling, to find that kind of work when it's just, a lot of it's really dried up.
I think we're also learning what is truly essential and what is a nice to have.
Yeah.
So maybe that's, not to speak about people or talent in those terms, but, things like corporate real estate. I'm seeing, you're in the New York City area. I can only imagine, just, be on TV, people aren't traveling to the Hearst building. They're not going, and just when I get a magazine in the mail these days, I'm like, how, this has been produced, I'm just thinking to myself how virtually it was produced versus, people in, storyboarding and, in each other's presence. So it's kind of amazing to see that the production, the quality still happens, using a different method, maybe.
Right. I mean, I literally put the April issue to bed with my team in person, and then the two issues after that were produced by my successor. But I agree with you. I am in awe that these teams continue to do this, and I'm just like completely blown away at the quality that I'm seeing. It's really amazing. People are resourceful, and and I think that as magazine editors, especially, I think are very, very resourceful people, because over the last 10, 15 years, as the culture has changed and people have become more digitally focused, we've really been forced to sort of think hard about how we produce magazines, how we produce things in print, and how to do it in a really in an efficient and cost-effective way. So in a way, what these teams are doing right now, and again, I'm so blown away by it, is just an extension of kind of what we've been doing all along. And I completely applaud, sort of the quality and the thinking that's going into it.
Yeah, because I'm still seeing, full feature editorials, as well as kind of the, if you look at like Entrepreneur or Inc. magazine, like the ever cascading updates of current events and kind of bringing that into the editorial space. Yeah. So you're seeing both styles and types of content. It's pretty amazing. So you have a love of travel.
I do.
So I did see a piece where you were talking about traveling with your daughter.
Yes.
On your new life's journey. So tell us about that.
Well, that was a story that I wrote for one of my favorite websites. It's called Grown and Flown. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's a website that's aimed at parents of older children and teenagers. So I'm the demographic.
I read the piece. Yeah.
Yeah, and I had intended when I left my job to take a 2-month sabbatical that was going to involve learning Spanish and cooking and traveling and. I think that the traveling piece is obviously,
grounded.
I'm definitely doing a lot of cooking. No question about that.
Yeah.
My Spanish lessons have fallen off a little bit because I'm focused on other things. But I was able to, in the week before this all happened, and the week after I after I left my job, I went to Arizona with my daughter for a week, and we went to Sedona, and my daughter's a very spiritual girl, and we wanted to go to a place where there are these amazing spiritual vortexes, and I just thought she would like it, and she actually loved it. She fell in love with the place. And we just had an amazing trip. And the article is basically about an experience that I had with her, and it really sort of speaks to how relationships with your children change over time, and especially how you relate to adult children. We were climbing up to a cave. We were on the side of a mountain, and I basically had a panic attack. I don't like heights, and even though you can't tell, I'm almost 6 feet tall, but I still don't like heights. And she really talked me down and really helped me in a way that really sort of helped me understand kind of what was going on, and so it was really. It was really a wonderful and very meaningful experience for both of us, and it's been it was quite lovely. So please read it.
Yes, I read the piece, and I was not familiar with the site, but so it sounds like she's become your friend.
Yeah. She's definitely my friend, but I always when I hear that. I always sort of slightly go, because I feel like we're very much have a mother-daughter relationship, and we love spending time with each other, and we love talking to each other, and but in essence we are we are mother and daughter. So right.
Talk about your charitable work as well. Obviously, on the written piece, you have stage work you've done with very prominent people. I believe there was, you tell us about it. Tell us about where you spend your volunteer time.
A lot of my, I sort of have drawn a little bit of a line over the years between sort of my personal things that I do, for myself and in my community, and then the things that I was doing at work. But I found that often they sort of fed into each other. So I think early in my time at Women's Day, we had a really nice content partnership with Feeding America. And I really loved the work they were doing. I went and visited them in Chicago, and we did some content around the idea of sort of supporting food pantries and supporting people who have food insecurity. And as I was doing all of this content, I sort of thought, Susan, you really need to, really kind of walk a mile in people's shoes, so to speak. And I was bothered by the fact that I was kind of doing all this work, sort of telling people to support food pantries and to support the food insecure, but I wasn't doing it myself. So I walked into a food pantry that's about a mile away from my house about, 6 years ago, and I walked in with my daughter's Girl Scout troop.
Oh, wow.
They were there to volunteer for an afternoon, and I kind of never left. So I've been volunteering at this food pantry for quite a long time, and we sort food, we collect food, we bag food, and then I started the crew that goes out on Saturday mornings and delivers food to a senior center, and then there's also a distribution as well. So I think it's been I've gotten to be good friends with the people who run the food pantry. And sort of it's allowed me to sort of see kind of the end result of what a big organization like Feeding America kind of does, and how it kind of comes down through various layers and ends up, in people's, feeding people actually. So that was one example. A lot of the work that I did at Women's Day was around women's health. and especially around women's heart health. Women's Day had a long tradition of working with the major heart associations like the American Heart Association, and sort of talking to women about why it's important to keep their hearts healthy. And when I first started there, we sort of took this idea of women's heart health and we magnified it and really started putting a lot of content behind it. A lot of advertising came out of it, and so it was a really successful piece for us. I ended up segueing a little bit into women's brain health as a result of that work, and having met some people. So that was something that I was really passionate about, and have done some work with an organization called Women Against Alzheimer's, which also culminated in being able to interview First Lady Laura Bush on stage, which was incredible. And I've also done some volunteer work with an organization, a New York-based organization called Safe Horizon, which is the nation's largest victim services provider. And they actually run the domestic abuse hotline for New York City and run many shelters in the city as well. And I've been working with their board, advising their marketing committee, and actually this week we're putting together I'm helping a little bit putting together a digital campaign and trying to get it out to some influencers to remind people that shelters are open and women are often, in very precarious situations, sheltering at home, often with their abusers. So we want to remind people that this organization is out there.
Yeah, I mean, so much of what you just said, I mean, all of what you do, it's just amazing. And how you have time to do that and making time to do that is also very admirable.
Important. Yeah, it's important, and it does take time, but I think it's something that it just fills you up, and that's the best feeling.
And I think a lot of times, or especially now, people are looking inwardly, and maybe they're concerned with their own situation, but these organizations that you mentioned, they're still continuing on. I mean,
they sure are. Yeah.
You think, well, obviously you turn on the TV news, the media's still working, Amazon's still delivering, the things that we need on an essential daily basis they're modified, but, we're able to exist. But the things that maybe we don't consider or take the time that aren't part of our 9 to 5, like these organizations. So that's, I'm sitting here listening to you talk and thinking, gosh, how are they managing through some of these challenges, or not being able to get, everything from probably like a laundry service to, food probably isn't the hardest thing, but yeah.
Yeah, I think that this is really an extraordinary time, and I think it's almost a golden era for the nonprofits who who basically form the basis of our social support system, and I think that sort of seeing the work that they do and seeing how the need for it is so magnified. I mean, the situation with food insecurity right now in this country as a result of this pandemic is terrifying. I think there's going to be people dying of hunger because they just don't have the resources to get food, and food banks are being incredibly challenged. Yeah. So I think that you're right. It is a little bit of a tug, because especially if you're fortunate enough to be in a situation like you have a house or you have an apartment and you have the means to buy food and you are able to get out and you're able to exercise. This is a terrible situation, but it's nowhere near what a lot of people are facing, or if you're certainly if you're on the front lines, if you're in the medical industry right now. So I think that it's hard because you're thinking, oh, I feel pretty comfortable and this is okay, I can maybe do this. And then on the other hand, it's just an onslaught of just, of just suffering in a lot of ways on so many levels. It's hard to kind of figure out how you bridge the gap between the two, because I don't think you want to be on either side fully.
So this past February, or isn't it every February is Women's Heart Health Month? Is that?
Yes, it is. February, so, the month where I wore red a lot.
So this past February was kind of leading up to this situation we're all in now with the pandemic. Did you, in your work with those organizations, were they seeing or looking into the future, or kind of, seeing how this is going to play out, or had it not?
I don't think it was really on anybody's minds of the organizations that I work with directly. I think that, I'm sure that there were some very smart people within those organizations who may have been raising red flags, but I wasn't made aware of them. I think, especially in February, heart health is it takes over. So that was very
Right.
much in everybody's mind, certainly on my staff's mind, and a lot of the organizations that we work for. I mean, I wish we all had a crystal ball, don't you? I mean, I wish we could have in mid-February said, hey, or beginning of February or January said, hey, this is coming. Here's how you prepare.
Yeah.
I think it would have helped.
When I saw your photo, it's on the written interview on She'sHerOwnCEO.com, the picture of you with the Surgeon General, that's what kind of drew me to that question. I was like, oh, wow, he was probably a little busy.
Yeah, so that was a panel that we did that we did about heart health, and yes, he sat on the panel, and it was a really good panel. We talked a lot about digital tools and digital health, and he's a very, very smart man, very engaging, and but I think his role was slightly different before he actually became one of the faces of the administration, because I think he was out there talking about general health, and now he's really talking about but a super
something
smart,
very specific.
super good guy. Yeah,
Really
really engaging, really smart guy, and I think he's to me he's trustworthy and believable, and it's nice to see him. Nice to see his face up there, somebody that, who has those qualities.
So I gave a speech. I'm involved with a lot of local universities here in Atlanta, and I get asked a lot about personal branding. Mm-hmm. And my message, my business, my consulting business, it's also a fashion line. It's called She's Her Own CEO. And I always challenge my audience to think about the title and the role of a CEO a little bit broader than, the textbook definition of, someone that sets strategic vision, someone that sets budgets, basically somebody that tells everybody else what to do. Somebody that's accountable to shareholders, or, for a nonprofit, building metrics. So I challenge people to think, how do you, even if you don't hold that title in a Fortune 500, Fortune 100 company, how do you become the CEO of your life? And I think personal branding is a big piece of it. So as you're talking about, your stage presence, your outreach, your connectivity with these other very large organizations, you're essentially, the CEO of your brand and your magazine.
Yeah.
What percentage of your time, or however you want to quantify this, or qualitatively describe it, did you spend, kind of as that public face versus, P&L management, staff, kind of the in-office work versus like TV, media, on stage, outward communication?
Right. I think it really sort of depended on sort of at what point in the year I was at. Like, going back to Heart Health Month, I would say that I spent probably about 90% of my time on digital. Yeah. And when we talk about personal branding, I feel like I always felt like I was the embodiment of the brand. So I was out there on TV and being interviewed and doing interviews and moderating, panels as the editor-in-chief of Women's Day. So it really wasn't about Susan Spencer. It was really about Susan Spencer, editor-in-chief. So other times of the year, I didn't really do as much, but it was pretty. I mean, I think sort of a steady stream, throughout my year of like, maybe 10-15% of my time, with more in February. But that's kind of something I really actually would love your advice on this, because this is where I'm sort of trying to, in my new role as my own CEO, where I'm trying to figure out how much time I spend and what my personal brand does, and how I take those pieces from my old job and bring it together into this new place where I am. And I'm beginning to realize that I do need to spend a lot of time on personal branding, for me. And that's exciting. And, I think
it is.
It's exciting. It's daunting. And it's kind of like in this world of in this slightly fractured world, it's interesting to think about how you go about that without sounding, completely, egotistical.
No, and we've said this word I think a couple times, but it's that balance, that push and pull, that tug, and it's finding that appropriate space.
Yeah.
And I know, making that transition from, such a high profile position, but for anybody out there that's kind of coming from a corporate, or maybe a position where you're working for someone else, or you're representing something else, to, really defining something on your own 2 feet. creating something from the ether, like you said earlier, probably about 20 minutes ago, it's about building your skills and accumulating a toolbox and taking that time now as you're making a transition to say, well, what have I accumulated, and kind of what am I good at? What have I proven myself successful in, and what do I like to do, and what are the confluence of those two lists?
Right.
So
yeah, and I think it's also sort of cultivating an entrepreneurial mindset.
Yes,
I think that, and you've talked about this, and I think that that's really important to sort of, because it is a big shift. It's not like, I've worked for people my entire life, my entire career, 32 years. I literally always had a corporation or a company structure.
Right. That's amazing.
And now I'm in. This is me. This is my company. And it's really, it's exciting, but it's kind of like it's like my brain has to kind of catch up with that. And because I'm so used to being able to, I've already messed up downloading Microsoft Word onto my laptop, and I have no IT department, to call. And, so unfortunately my daughter can help me, but, it's an interesting shift in thinking.
Yeah. But that, like you just mentioned, a really great point. It's about knowing when to delegate and knowing, what you're good at, what you're capable of, and, where you need to kind of draw that line and say, is it worth it for me to spend, 5 to 8 hours to solve a problem I'm not really, it's not my wheelhouse, or is it better to, pay somebody to do it, or, because I see a lot of people starting businesses, and they may take on the wrong activities because there's so many things. I mean, as it's like, being a CEO of a company or being an editor-in-chief of a magazine. You have marketing, you have sales, you have brand management. I mean, you have all these components. And when you're kind of going out on your own, you have to somehow cover all of those things. And if you don't have aptitude and say, or the patience to build a website, it's really important to take that time and be honest with yourself. Because I think a lot of people, as they go through their career, they get some kind of feedback from their employer, but it's not useful feedback.
Right.
And they kind of go through career and say, it's almost like a false SWOT analysis that they have on themselves. What are they really skilled in? Where are their weaknesses? And I think it's really important when people make a transition to be very, very honest and take that look in the mirror and even ask people around you. And I'm not saying, don't ask people that are potentially jealous or have other personal issues, but ask trusted people that, have a vested interest in your success and say, what do you want? What would you like to see from me? What am I good at? So I think that honesty moment, that, I'll call self-introspection, or, intellectual curiosity about yourself is just really, really important.
Yeah. I think that's really, really great advice. I mean, I think it's good advice for anybody who is kind of going through a career transition. And it's also, I think it's also about shedding things. And
yes,
because, you don't have to be good at everything. And I tell this to a lot of people. I've told this to a lot of people over the years, is that, just because you get to a certain level doesn't mean that you know how to do everything. And the most thing that you can do as a manager is to literally say, I don't know. I'm not really sure. Tell me how to do this. And having those people that you can bounce ideas off of and to turn to, so that you can ask those questions, I think is really important. So then when you get to a place where you're self-employed or you're starting a business, that you almost have that network in place of those people who can say yes or no, and you shouldn't do this, or this is where you need to head. And I think it's so important. It's so important. So I really appreciate that you said that.
No, thanks. I'm all about, honesty, transparency with oneself. I think that's just really, really key to having a successful transition, no matter what. It's interesting. And there's probably going to be a lot more migrations and transitions happening over the next, year, because I think things are going to be sorting out for quite a while, as far as, like I said, what's necessary and what's a nice to have. So,
I've spent a little bit of time in the last month talking to some entrepreneurs, and to every single one of them has said to me, they've talked about sort of the creativity rising out of the ashes, and talked about, the companies that were formed in 2002 after 9/11, and 2008 and 2009 after the recession, during the recession, and talked about the incredible kind of pivoting and thinking that came out of, not just Silicon Valley wasn't all digital, but just in a lot of different places. Yeah. And that really makes me really hopeful in a lot of ways that we're going to be able to get out of this, because I feel like there's somebody in her garage right now, or in a tiny apartment in Queens or somewhere, who's coming up with a great idea that's going to employ people, that's going to sustain people, that's going to change our society, that's going to make things easier, help women stay healthier. I mean, these people are all out there, and I love that, in a way, in a sort of a kind of a funny way, this terrible thing that we're all going through is, may just lead to some good things as well. I hope it does. I think it will.
I 100% agree with you. I've had that kind of hopeful thread running throughout this whole conversation. Mm-hmm. You got to watch the news, and you got to, kind of be grounded on the reality. But...
yeah, I think once a day is probably good enough.
What is next for you, or what are you looking at next, Susan?
Well, that's the big question that I've been grappling with.
What are you exploring?
I am doing some major exploring. So right now, I'm spending a lot of my time having conversations. I'm fortunate enough to have a really large and vibrant network of friends and colleagues and people from all different walks of life. So I'm talking to people, and
that's great.
Trying to hone in on where I want to go. I left with the intention of wanting to work for a foundation or a nonprofit, because I want to weave my interest in social good into my work. And it was very much woven into my work at Women's Day, but I want to make it a little bit more front and center. Mm-hmm. That was kind of the reason that I left, and that was my goal. And I still have that goal in mind, but I'm also realizing that I may have to take either a more entrepreneurial path and actually create a platform or a service or something, or I may sort of stay a little bit more in the content world. So I'm exploring a lot of different things, but the through line from my old career to whatever the new thing is helping to educate and empower women. And if I can do something within women's health, I think it would be a strong through line. But being able to, continue the work that I did on the Women's Day platform, which was essentially that education piece and that empowerment piece, that's the goal. That's where I'm going. Right. It's time to find the job.
No. This is so inspiring, and I love that through line approach. I think that's so right. I mean, that is just like correct thinking. Looking at what you have and where you want to go, and we can just keep talking, and we do need to wrap this up because they do tend to cut us off. But one more comment I wanted to make, and we didn't really touch on this, but the power of networks. This is something, I think people in the audience looking at you is like, well, she's the editor-in-chief. She has all these fabulous contacts, media, TV, national TV. I totally see that and respect that. I think each woman really needs to take inventory of her own personal network and situation.
Yes,
and identify where those gaps, hopefully it's not a void. Hopefully you have communication skills, and we all have LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. We all have, the social networking, but beyond that, just even if a person is in a job that she hates or is just draining and, it's time for a change. Mm-hmm. Really don't waste that opportunity. I mean, there is something good to be had in no matter, where you are. And networking is a big piece of it, mm-hmm. because that next step, whatever that next step may be, and I'm not talking about you because your network's amazing, but for somebody that may be on a smaller platform, maximizing that network in that current position, I think is really critical.
Right. I think so too. And I think that, obviously, platforms like LinkedIn make it super I found that especially in the pandemic, I'm getting more sort of responses and interactions with people over Instagram. Honestly, I think people are really sort of there right now. So I'm putting a lot of my efforts, actually, my networking efforts into Instagram.
Good.
And I think, which I didn't really think I would be doing. So I think you have to adapt a little bit. But we have those tools, but nothing beats a phone call where you say at the end, if you know anybody who does X, can you connect them with me? And I will tell you that I've had some incredible conversations, starting with friends of friends who refer me on to friends of friends of friends. And I've met these so many amazing women, frankly, who are supportive and who open up their Rolodexes. No, we don't have Rolodexes anymore, but
we did.
It's an expression.
Yeah.
And people and women who have been incredibly generous with their time and with their thoughts, and that has happened to me across the board. And so I do think that while the social media pieces are incredibly important, I think that person to person talking and connecting is super important.
And helping, women helping other women. I mean, obviously. Absolutely. Men in the equation too, but just speaking to this point, women helping other women is it's so powerful. And another thing that I kind of coach on is that the pie isn't just something that keeps getting cut smaller and smaller. If we help each other, that pie can grow.
Absolutely.
So as you've helped and mentored other women, that enabled you to maybe hire one of those women or build your team. I mean, you grew your portfolio by helping others. And I think that a lot of people, that point gets missed on them a lot.
Yeah. And I think you also have to think about your network as, both people who are older than you, people who are younger than you. I have a former assistant who used to work for TED Talks. And I called her the other day to talk to her about that because I had an idea for a TED Talk. So, she was helping me, and, I helped launch her career, and that it all comes around.
Full circle. It's so true.
Grateful. Yeah.
Susan, this has been outstanding, and I appreciate your time. And
I appreciate all your advice. You're fantastic.
Oh my God! Well, thank you. Let's stay in touch.
Okay.
I'm going to take a download of this live interview. I'll post it. Where can people find you, Susan, if they want to learn more about you or get in touch with you? What would you like people to know?
Of course, I'm on LinkedIn. Feels like half a day, but I have a lot of fun on Instagram. It really is. It's really my favorite platform. I'm not on Twitter. I find it a little bit too much of the bubble. But Instagram to me is just creative and fun. And, I try to, post some interesting things. So I'm at Susan Spencer 28. And I would welcome followers. I love interacting with people. And, it's definitely my favorite platform. Although I've been told that TikTok's pretty fun. I'm trying to get my daughter to do a TikTok with me. I think she's resisting so far.
That's a whole nother.
It's a whole other thing.
A whole other thing. Well, again, Susan, thank you so much for being on this episode of CEO Live. And like I said, I'll post this recording. I'll also post it to the written interview. So as people are reading your piece, learning more about you, seeing some of the still images that you've provided from your life and your career, they can also see this interaction and then get some of your links as well. So with that, so much.
I really appreciate your time and you're wonderful, you're a fantastic interviewer. This was really fun.
Thank you. And I wish you and your family health and happiness and, just all the success. So
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay.
See you soon. Bye-bye. Take care.